Done. Ready. Roll.
Great. So I'll go ahead and like kick us off here. But there's a handful of other folks from the Regen network that I'm just going to highlight that I want you all to chip in and kind of contribute to the conversation. There's Shaila Agha from Regen Foundation, hi, and then Becca from Regen Network. So um, we got this invite out a little bit late, but that's not a problem. I'm happy you all are here. Uh, this session is a kind of like pause and like reflection session that I think is in some ways a reflection on what's happening within the sort of proposition and the larger landscape of regenerative economics as we see it. And it's also around like how we might use this call going forward and like um, exploring what is the full breadth of potential for the technical and economic and like sort of social stack that region has developed. And if I say region has developed it, I mean everyone, there's many actors in the kind of ecosystem who are developing it. And so to be more concise and clear about what I'm saying is that we decided to change the name of this call. It's not a big tweak, it's a small one, but it's kind of significant in terms of the attitude. Um, and we thought it would be a good idea to have this session be a way to how to sort of chew on that together. So I'm going to kick us off with some context setting around why RBL and to give some thoughts from the foundation's perspective around what is implied and what can we talk about explicitly in the change of the name. And then we'll have a session where Becca is going to use the Regen stack for a project that she's doing locally in Tennessee in her community as part of her own life as a regenerative human being. And we're not going to be talking about this in terms of, um, are these pre-finance credits? Are what exactly is the sort of additionality, the kind of language that you might find more commonly in the space of crediting? We're going to take a walk through a space of application for this larger set of tooling and thinking that doesn't explicitly serve itself to crediting. And the reason we're doing that, and just to kind of launch, oh, sorry, and then we'll conclude with maybe two breakout sessions. It's a fairly intimate group today, and I think still two is enough space for people to really just hang out and talk and compare notes. So we'll break out into breakout sessions, and that'll be the sort of structure of today. So part of the reason that we're proposing, or actually I'll just stop and say, any questions, comments, edits from the Regen team or participants?
Oh, I think I
Cool.
would just
Go
add
ahead.
that we've been working within the crediting space for a couple of years now, and both wearing the hat of a software like infrastructure developer and working with the hat of registry methodology developer. Um, and within both of those frames, we've rubbed up against all of the rough edges of crediting. And many of us, being kind of ecologists by training or by heart, really kind of struggled with how um, how I think maybe terse or lacking crediting felt in and of itself, that there was just more to communicate about what's happening on the ground, about the data that's being collected, about the implications of, not having funding to do regenerative work. And so there was kind of like there's just been a long blossoming conversation around like how can we be within the crediting world and also improve it and open it to speak more broadly about what's at play. And that has expressed itself in us exploring like novel methodologies and working with a lot of different folks. Um, and now it's expressing itself within our software. And that's both by kind of just a change of mind about what we already have built and how it can be used. And that is an infinite exploration because we have an infinite, amount of things that we can do to regenerate the different micro and macro ecosystems of the world. And so I'm personally just really excited to step intentionally into that space and to with pretty open eyes as to like what the opportunities are, how we can continue to iterate and explore that together. And yeah, this is like one of those intentional steps to do that.
Nice. So this is a session that Sila, Becca, and myself are pretty excited to be talking about because we have had this very active desire and want to explore applications for a ledger dedicated to ecosystem stewardship to be something that isn't so entirely constrained within the space of crediting. If you're here to talk about credits because you love credits and that's what gets you up in the morning, no, don't dismay. This isn't still entirely relevant to that space, but what we're trying to do is, in effect, um, expand the surface area of application for the kind of technical systems that have been developed by folks who join this call and by the Regen team into a sort of like broader set of use cases. And part of this was prompted by the fact that uh, to date, in order to interact with many of the technical, economic, or like technology-based integrations that deal with crediting, uh, an individual, like many of you on the call, have to understand what is, or at least have some level of confidence in your current and future understanding of what the crediting marketplace looks like in order to begin building and deploying and developing projects. Well, maybe people are already involved with projects on the ground, they're project developers, or they're just committed volunteers, or they're people who care. But in order to take a certain number of steps, people have to feel like there's confidence in a market around like ecosystem, like natural assets in the form of credits, for it to be something that they want to continue developing. And we have identified that that at its root is kind of a core issue because there will probably never be a scenario where there's total clarity around what is exactly happening with the natural assets within crediting markets, whether those be carbon or biodiversity. It's just particularly volatile, and it comes with a lot of heated sort of opinions about it because some people think it's the fungibility of living systems and living value is unethical or inappropriate, and others are saying it's purely from an offset context, and others are saying no, it's a sort of a store of regenerative value, however that community wants to define it. So there's a range of different sort of motivations, but what is holding people back, I think, in a way from being able to develop projects that are anchored on chain and leveraging the legibility that that provides to secure funding, to secure certification, to secure just like publicity or access to a broader set of stakeholders. We feel like that's being underserved because everyone's just talking about crediting. So we renamed the project Regen Builder Lab rather than Eco Credit Builder Lab, and all of us gently sighed a sigh of relief that the word credit was out of the name. I did, and I know the other two did. And again, I'm not here to like smash on credits. We've been working on them and we've been developing them. And I think that we've been developing some of the most high integrity projects around credits with amazing people like folks on this call and others who might be watching the recording. So we're not trying to dismiss them, but think of this as an expansion of the space that is possible. And I could go on and on about this. I'm going to say a few more things and then I'll just pass it over to Becca to like have her do like a demo and then we can see where the breakout rooms go. But part of it is, I think, this question around should an entity like a blockchain that's dedicated to storing and reflecting human environmental impact, um, what kind of entity, like on a like business or like legal level, should that be? And we've been discussing that quite a bit. And there's an active discussion within Regen Network right now to make the Regen Ledger and also the Regen Registry, which what that is kind of somewhat of a complex thing, or it might change depending on who you ask, as a nonprofit entity, as a kind of like utility. So rather than approaching registries or the ledgers that underpin those registries as an enterprise, it should be understood as a kind of like public utility for logging environmental impact. And people can build programs on top of that. If you want to build a crediting program on top of that utility, like Ocean Carbon Trust and Gabe have been working on, like Sea Cheese or Terrasos, or the Jaguar credit. Those are all like programs that can operate on top of a kind of public utility around measuring human environmental impact. But that the utility itself should be understood as a sort of like nonprofit entity. It's like a more like an infrastructural layer. And so that's been a conversation that's been very active in our organization. I'm quite excited about that, because it begins to tease out separate aspects. Like there's this sort of the core, the kind of infrastructural ledger registry operations. People might call that different things. I think of it as what I call a claims engine, which is basically a utility that allows people to log and anchor claims around environmental impact. Others in our space are using that in slightly different ways, so we can have a whole dedicated session about that sometime. But that it allows effectively people to develop programs on top of a utility. And so your program might be proving that you have stewarded city trees in your town, and thus the municipality should give your volunteer group more funding in order to continue doing the work that you're doing. Or you're trying to make a new kind of like fair trade or organic or like shade grown certification. You could be doing something where you're trying to actually lower your insurance premiums because you're demonstrating through claims that your neighborhood has been mitigating fire risk, in the case if you lived in Southern California. So there's a lot of places where like clear attestations around nature positive impact, like human environmental stewardship, can inform and influence economic and policy and decision making that aren't just in the space of credits. And we think that this general approach is a way to not have users have to adopt or believe in a market-based approach in order to use the technology. And that's like a big unlock, that you don't have to believe in a market-based approach. You can if you want, but it takes all kinds and it sort of multiplies the application surface area for this kind of work. And I think that's the focus of RBL. It's like Regen Builder Lab. So we're going to be talking about ways that people have been developing projects on Regen that like get people up and running fast and feel like it's bringing value to their project, legibility and credibility to their project like sooner, without having to wait for the market to make sense, because it's never going to make sense. I'll conclude by saying that this is basically my slightly annoyingly poetic way of putting this, and this is like I really do think this is that to date the economic and policy making systems that we have in place are operating blindly. There is not an active system by which sensing, like eyes and ears and touch, can actually make sense of what is the state of the living world and the people living in it. So our economy and our policy and administrative political layers are like largely operating blindly. And okay, if I just cut right through it, like there's an incentive within capitalism for it to operate blindly and to keep those things as externalities. So maybe in the idea of presenting and situating the RBL, we're talking about how can we use a distributed technical stack around ownership, governance, and sensing to like build the sense organs back into economic decisions, into local policy decisions, so that the state of the world can be integrated more actively into evaluation systems, into decisions from a municipality, into larger federal like policy decisions. And so that's kind of like the bigger push, is that we want to bring the state of the world and its stewardship in to be informed, credible, durable, to like influence these higher order systems. Okay, maybe that was a mouthful, maybe not, but we thought it would be really cool over time, but for each one of us and folks joining the call to take a spin at using the ledger for something that they're like just doing in their lives, and like just as part of their own relationship with stewardship. It doesn't have to be amateur. Um, uh, you could certainly be doing this for professional applications, and we want to talk about those. We are still actively engaging and supporting enterprise clients, and we love it. But we thought it'd be cool just to like have literally the people who are building and sculpting RBL with you all to just take a pass at how we would use that and how we actually are planning to use this whole stack in our lives. And that got us to Becca doing a demo of some of the work that she's been doing. And it kind of lands this all in the concrete and less in the sort of systems theory and abstract positioning. So I'll stop there. Maybe I'll open it for any questions, and then pending whatever that discussion, I'll pass it over to Becca. But yeah, Becca, Shyla, anyone else, if you have thoughts or comments before we do the demo, I welcome that. Thanks for coming, y'all.
I'll just say I resonate a lot with this process, I guess, that we are going through, but Regen specifically. And as a user group within this system, we've also seen the limitations of crediting and the need to search beyond crediting for innovative biodiversity finance solutions. So I am with you guys.
Thank you. Right on. Which is interesting because Makwi Pakuna started initially as a biodiversity keystone species crediting project. And that's not to say that it isn't, but maybe it's more evolved into something that has a different approach. And maybe in a future session, David, you could lead one about what you all are doing, because I know it's evolving, and that would be really cool. But yeah, thank you.
And then I'll also resonate with you saying, let's not discredit the credits. There is still value in credits, and I'm by saying I resonate with this, I'm saying there's value beyond credits, and I do believe that we can still work towards developing a strong credit market. I just think that is not very easy. It is also very dependent on politics, sometimes economics, factors outside of our control many times. All that said, we can innovate around all of that, work with it, and so yeah, I think there's space for both, but I love where you guys are going with this, because I think it makes the tool so much more versatile, and we can use it in many creative ways.
I'd like to add something. Hi, everyone. I'm Shyla. I work with Austin and Becca. And I'm in Nairobi right now in Kenya. And I feel as though I've been really loving the Regen Builder Lab calls. And I've wanted to introduce or to invite a few, like, regenerators or land stewards that I've been working with, or my community, and I've always had some hesitation because of just the complexity. So I feel like this step is now just a move toward a more inclusive space where people can come and actually tell you about what they're doing on the ground, and they can see about how they can put it on the ledger, and it's just opening it up. And just as you said, David, it's eco credit, and which is perfect. It's just, how do we make a bigger tent? Because we already had a big tent approach, but how do we make an even bigger tent to include most of the land stewards who are, actually working on the land, but just don't have the capacity to actually be in the eco credit space, or don't even have the resources to even reach there. So I'm really happy about this. I feel it's a move in the right direction, and I feel it's probably going to have a broader audience, which is great.
Yeah, if I may add really quick, I'm part now of I'm pretty sure you know Capital Institute's Regenerative Economics, and I'm part of the fellowship. I took the courses last year, and what that has helped me understand in terms of economics and environment, I'm an environmental engineer, is that something that I like to share is that at the current time we are in a transitioning phase between one economical system that operates within certain limitations that originated by the access of technology and science at some point, when this type of financial or economical system was developed. And we're now in this process of transitioning. And basically what eco credits or this type of digital commodities or assets, what they are able to provide, it's a functioning mechanism that can operate within current traditional economical system, but it's also outlining the foundations for the new economical system. So I basically see this type of eco credits as just that. It's like a transitioning mechanism that allows us to operate. We can still make money by proving some level of ecological benefit using the prior economical system with all of its complexities. But ultimately, we're trying to figure out how we're going to give value to the processes and complex, natural complex systems and so on for near future. Maybe we'll continue this conversation later, but I am a little bit kind of like interested to understand how we may like. I've been working on a specific type of credit, which is soil organic carbon based, and this just this is super complex, and it's so much different between one type of methodology and the other. How the scientific approach and measurement and so on is like how it changes the levels of precision and trustworthiness and so on. That for me, it's kind of it's interesting to try to understand what is the perspective of on the future, how we're gonna be able to prove, for example, that the ecological claims are real if we are adding layers of complexity. Like that's the only part that I would like to like kind of be able to visualize further. Anyways, very happy to be here.
Sounds like a great set of questions and prompts for a breakout session today. Awesome. Becca, do you want to fire it up? If we maybe this is great. We already have like stuff in the air that we can work through in the sessions, but maybe we'll pass it to you so we can get going.
Sounds great. And I'm feeling like starting, instead of jumping into just my project, is actually looking together as kind of an exercise
Nice.
in all of the, so on Regen now, you can see like, all these different projects. But I want us to look at the projects that are not registered with any crediting protocol. These are like unregistered community projects from all different parts of the world.
This is like the Regen Ledger underground. That
Underground.
isn't.
We rename that? Yes, it should say underground. And this is almost like, this is the real world in many ways, where we're looking at folks that are in progress, if we're looking at the San Juan Islands project that Gabe and KCT are working on, like this is where, they're building the muscle, they're communicating the impact. We've got this project here that we were looking at yesterday where you've got a project that's working on a wetlands reserve in Texas, and they're they're using this to capture like comments from residents about protecting local wildlife and these pictures of local wildlife. And it's simple and a beautiful expression of like what they're trying to do. And this is like an immutable record, that's been created like using the ledger. And over time, it actually might be even more impactful than any of these, any of the credits. So this in way is like a minute to just like recognize how much is going on in the world. There's Makipakuna and also as an invitation that like this is available to utilize. This is a cool project from Ukraine that I'm talking to those folks about some forest preservation work as well. So this, and I'll put this into chat if folks want to dig around more. This is really like where we have like the sandbox happening of what is potential, how we can look at using this technology for these different attestations of impact.
And interestingly, part of the reason that they're not registered is because they might not in their basis fit into a crediting scheme. And as to date, the software architecture hasn't had a place to put those things. So they live in the unregistered category. And so as a community, we're finding a lot of inspiration that there's multiple pages of projects that are unregistered because they don't fit within the classification system that's currently in place. Again, that's why we're calling it RBL. Keep going, Becca.
And I'm going to create another one with you today for the project I'm working on. Before doing that, I wanted to point to this other kind of like this other instance, a project that I was working on last year with a group out of California called Zero Footprint. And they run a grant program around regenerative agriculture practices. They're basically like kind of implementing legislation in California around like composting and food waste. And they're exploring using this to communicate about their like various projects. And within each one, like who they're not looking at crediting, they're looking at like all the different, but communicating all the different benefits of these projects. And then even if we look down to like what's really on chain, they're looking at like was this a historically underserved project? How much funding and from whom, for the funders for these projects, like the specific activities like compost application, and like they're like expressing what is like highly unique to their program, just in ways that are both like storytelling and qualitative and quantitative data richness. So this one was a cool one. I'm going to take you on a journey, and you guys are all going to come to East Tennessee with me for a minute. So get yourselves ready, and I'm going to create a project. I've been working for about a year now. I'm going to log in, like you can do either log in. I'm just going to log in with my wallet to make this an on-chain project. And I'll put it on chain after, but I'm just going to create it on chain now. And I've been working on a project called Reoak Oakwood. And it's an urban, I live in a pretty dense urban neighborhood in Knoxville. And it is about 150 hectares. And it's called Oakwood, my neighborhood, because of its huge historic oaks. And many of them are being cut down. And these are trees that provide just so many benefits to humans, but like they're the ecosystem. This is an oak hickory forest. And so you have like raptors and migrating warblers and like all sorts of different fauna that survive off of these like keystone trees. So after my neighbors and I had been walking around for, many years, like mourning the loss of these keystone trees, we were like, well, let's get our boots on and get some more trees planted. And so we got a grant, and we've been planting like 50 trees so far. And I actually have been meaning to create a project page for this project because I want to take it to the city of Knoxville and say, hey, city, this is a model and you should give us some money. So I'm going to create a project page, and it's going to be I'm gonna like send it to this person later. I could type in like my profile or region address. I'll just skip that for now. And I'm gonna like pop in
Can I interrupt you for a second? Just to note that at the very first step, you chose to make a project with an unregistered credit type rather than using one of the existing credit classes that was there. Can you just say a few words about that?
Yeah,
You don't have to
so
go back. Just
the existing credit classes, that we have are ones that have gone through both a scientific and governance process, where they've gone through a review process, and experts have reviewed them, and they are, sufficiently ready to develop projects off of. And they've also gone through a governance process whereby the community, via Commonwealth, voted that this, credit class can be on chain with this credit type. And so I think this is an interesting moment where like the rubber meets the road when we're thinking about the extension of what we can do, and what it means to just create kind of more autonomous instances of impact. And creating an unregistered project just means that you're not connected to a particular credit class or its rules or regulations, that you're expressing, your own impact on your own terms. And there's a whole lane of inquiry that we could have together around like what does it look like to really experiment more with creating credit classes which anyone can. That's something new as of last year. Anyone can create these new credit classes. But there is a level of kind of like technicality that we would have to work through as a community to make that really accessible to people. So right now, these are living kind of as their own impact instances, these projects are. And this is certainly one of them because this project does not have a credit class. Maybe in a future world it could claim some carbon credits. But I'm just gonna like tell the story. Like I'm trying to tell the city why this is important and why they should fund it. I also want to be able to have this like instance in time documented on an immutable ledger so that in however many years into the future, like it will be noted that this happened and that this is the data around it. So I'm also going to be like attaching some data to it. And I can come back and add photos later, but what I want to do is hit publish. And then, so I've created a project. So this is like living for real in the unregistered underground project universe. And it picked up the location. And what I want to be able to do is then attach like more images and then like using the data stream, I want to create a post and I want to have like for the city, I want to say, city, I have these planting locations. So I'm going to bring a CSV over and I have the JSON as well in the next file. And I want you, city, to see this information in a way that is like professional and communicates story and gives you some like, some data behind it. So files for city. And each of these posts is going to be on, it's going to be anchored on the blockchain. So even me just using, my, unregistered project flow and all of this information is going to live on the blockchain ledger. So this step alone has made that functionality available to anyone. You don't have to have a credit class or go through the program or anything to like really put the ledger to your use. And I want to make, I just want to make the file private because it's just going to the city, and I'll maybe make more of a formal comment afterwards, but I'll just put that there. And then I want to like show you what it would look like. So this is the other feature where if you want to be able to sign it with your blockchain wallet, if you're logged in and want to like attest to it, like I claim this to be true, then I can do that, which I will.
So like rather than just hitting the submit button in a generic way, you're using the attestation logic of blockchains to be like, Becca's collateralizing her submission with her signature. She's signing it and saying that she represents this. So it's a kind of verification process that just happened. But we could talk about more complex ways that multiple people might sign something, or it's done in a peer fashion. But there's a lot going on that's really interesting in that last step. So I felt compelled to interrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of what that ends up looking like and what Austin's referring to, where you for this like data entry, if you will, I have like a unique identifier for it and my signature is attached to it. Like that alone demonstrates so much like authenticity of information and of story that becomes highly relevant to, if you're pursuing funding, if you're trying to make a claim about something, if you're trying to like push for policy change, being able to have that utility is not something that we're really seeing elsewhere. So this is what this ends up looking like. This, I'll probably come back and add some more content, but this is what I want to be able to share with the city to say this is the work that we've done. You can look under the hood of it and find the nuts and bolts of what we did. And then over time, this is something that future groups, like my kids, if they grew up in this neighborhood, they're like, oh, mom, back in 2024, planted these trees. This was the size of the forest canopy. This is the size of the forest canopy now. This is how many more migrating warblers we saw this year. And therefore, we're like this connection point between public, private, citizen science, regulation, policy, impact. Just a lot is happening within one space that a community gets to control and design.
Right. We are not requiring that the municipality maintain the database nor the federal government, but the actual like community of people who are doing this practice are creating their own durable way to say what impact and has happened and what they did. And I feel like in a very humble way, that's a really radical thing.
Feels that way. I appreciate you all letting me like get this work done with you. But I think that's a good time to pause and let everyone kind of like interact with this broadened scope and like what that brings up for people in their own worlds. Like, are there opportunities? Are there more questions?
I have a question, Becca. I may have the answer to it, but I'm just asking because maybe the room doesn't know. When you were signing in, you signed in with your Kepler wallet. And do you need a Kepler wallet, or can you just sign in
You don't, you can sign in with just your email. The only thing that's not available is being able to digitally sign. So in that little pop-up box, if you want to be able to digitally sign, then you'll need to have a blockchain wallet. But you can literally use your email to create a record on the blockchain, which is really highly accessible. We recognize how like blockchain is this big utility, but is very inaccessible. So this is the first step into us like opening that to folks that need to step into Web3 lightly.
Super
I think what we
cool.
could do, is, I mean, if there's any high level comments that people want others to hear, I think that would be great. Generally with a group like this, I think we're just big enough to break into two groups. That way we have a little bit more intimacy in the conversation. So what I would propose, if anyone has like a high level thing you'd like to share with everyone, go for it. And then we should do two breakouts and for 20 to 30 minutes and then we can reconvene. Does that sound all right?
I have one maybe high level comment.
Go for it.
I see a very strong use case in these I guess non-credit based attestations. I'm curious how we can involve the right funders to appreciate them. And so in your case, for example, you mentioned, okay, the city or municipality in Tennessee might be called on to recognize this value. And so I guess there's this question of how can we set the precedent so that that value can actually be paid for in some way. And there are cases of how this has been done outside of these systems that we can call learn from.
We are going out tonight again.
Mike, you want to put yourself on mute? I hope you have a good time tonight.
But yeah, that was my only comment, is kind of that question of linking this to funding, which is also kind of the challenge with credits and what this seeks to address as well.
Yeah, it's something that we've talked a lot about. Even, if you had some sort of like modular way to like bring in, like if you didn't want like the crediting piece, on a page, could you bring in more of like a philanthropic, like donate to support, or like click into, like learn what you can specifically contribute to. Like, I'm not sure if folks have seen like the sea trees model where you can like, buy like 1 square meter or something of coral reef to, to support. So this whole like, how to package it, how to fund it, because it's because within such a broad scope, it's going to look so broad. I feel like that is going to be really interesting to unpack around different use cases. Like, how is that communicated in a way that doesn't force us back into like the outcome package, the outcome unit package. And I think that's something that we've we've explored a lot more of the edges with biodiversity, because it's a very alive conversation within that space, is how does one calculate within the ancestral jaguar credits. We took the route of pre-financing a pilot to say we're not sure exactly, but this is how much this activity costs right now. I feel like that is well worth kind of like a value stakeholder mapping different use cases sort of session.
Maybe
Sounds
I
like
want
it.
to. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to piggyback on that, and I think that that's like it's a very activating comment and question. I think it's really helpful. Like it makes me think that maybe in a way, like a lot of what we're doing is like pre-financing as a phrase is more broadly applicable than people might realize. It's not just about crediting. If there's a scenario where somebody's producing an asset and then saying going to market and looking for purchasers for it, that is so late in the process to involve and implicate a potential funder or somebody who's engaging with the sort of like production and consumption of living value. So like there is no there is no scenario where there is not storytelling at the heart of how value is created. Like even in the basis of how we talk about the fiat currencies and USD, if like we want to go hard at it. Like it is always a way of kind of telling a story around its provenance and therefore its integrity. So if people wanted to petition to a federal government to support them in maintaining an endangered keystone species like a spotted Andean bear, or they want to mitigate loss of historic like charismatic oak trees in their neighborhood, assuredly, in order to get buy-in and to get leverage within whether it's a funding ecosystem, philanthropic, or a market-based, you have to be able to tell a story and demonstrate like what has happened and how that has played out. And in a way, I think what we're talking about is introducing the process of storytelling of living value or regenerative value earlier, and not making people have to understand the last step in the process in order to begin. And the Jaguar credit is in effect like, okay, this is a complex, fairly novel approach towards value creation. We need to begin telling that story as soon as possible and engaging with individuals who are going to implicate themselves in funding it as soon as possible, because almost no funder is going to just do that in a purely transactional way. These systems of value are relational. The purchaser themselves is implicating themselves in the story too. So like this is a way to tell that story sooner and in a more durable, rigorous way with a mix of quantitative and qualitative measures, I think, that allows a certification standard, a crediting paradigm, a grant from the federal government from a development bank to have much more substance behind it. And so maybe it's not like it's outside of credits, but like upstream of any of these other forms of asset creation and definition, we need to be able to durably be telling these stories and making, advocating for the impact that's actually happening. Cool. Maybe with that, we'll hop into the breakout rooms. I don't know if I have the ability to do that. I do. Would we want to do one? Becca, I felt like you were pretty well suited to engage with Ephraim's question specifically about it's like more about soil organic carbon methodologies and navigating that within the context of what we're talking about here. So maybe we can make one group that's a bit more oriented towards that. I would call it a slightly more advanced topic. We'll call Becca's world the 2.0, and maybe the one I'll stay in will be the 1.0. And the 1.0 will just be this room. We'll stay in this room, and the 2.0 will be Becca's, and that will be in a second room. I'm not gonna. Okay, y'all should be able to see it now. Can you?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Austin,
hang
can
with
you
me.
remind
Yeah.
me what is the 2.0 and 1.0?
2.0 is just like perhaps more advanced topic discussion. 2.0 is like in college courses, like the 101 is the intro, and the 202 is the intermediate. So I just felt like if Rain's question was slightly more 2.0, or like getting into the nuts and bolts of soil organic carbon methodologies in relation to this, and I'm just be here with whoever wants to talk.
I'm having this pop-up that is taking me to the room 1. If I
Yep.
wanted to go to room 2, can you remind
There's
me?
only, yeah, this is semantic collapse. There's only one breakout room because we don't need to make,
Ah,
we can just keep this room. So the 2.0
okay,
session
got you.
is
All
in
right, all
room
right,
1.
all right.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay.
We're in room 0. I should have described it as 0 and 1. Yeah.
All right.
And I'm gonna grab some more tea, and so I'll be right back. Y'all are free to
Maybe I
introduce
can.
yourselves.
Yes, yeah. Maybe I can also actually let's start with the introduction because I think Kiala and Civil Monkey, you joined us a bit later, so maybe you want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, yeah, I'm Civil. I actually have to jump in a minute because I'm hosting a call. Then, yeah, I've been in the Web3 regen social impact world in general for a couple of years, and yeah, mostly online, but I'm also more and more working with on the ground organizations, and yeah, still a little puzzled by like at what point is like such experimental technology and such like early stage technology, at what point can it actually benefit um, on the ground impact work, and at what point is it just more administrative work? So yeah, still like in that phase of exploring that. And yeah, I host weekly NFTs for social good spaces, which is about to start on Twitter, and yeah, I do a bunch of other things like in the regen coordination conglomerate kind of, for instance, of Greenpeace Network and refind.DAO and help with coordination there, and yeah, just try to help make the energy flow in the regen world a little better. Yeah.
Nice to meet you. I think I've interacted with you on Twitter, so nice to meet you. Welcome,
Oh,
and
that is
sorry that you
possible. Maybe you're going by a different name there. The
Captain
names in
Obvious.
Web3 always are.
I'm Captain Obvious on Twitter.
Oh, you are? Oh, really?
Yes,
Oh, that's so cool.
that's me.
Great to meet you.
Yeah. So yeah, we have I mean, I'll put the link here for the Luma, and then maybe you can check and see if you can join other sessions as well, because this is just monthly as well. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm always sharing these like in my drop of events. I do like kind of newsletter-ish things of events, and yeah, been including them the last few months.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of directions that we could take this. I know that, David, you have submitted a proposal and I've been experimenting with some sort of like kind of like a stacked crediting approach that is also slightly pre-financing, that has adjacency to like NFT for social impact NFT-esque stuff, or at one point was related to that. If anyone has prompts or questions related to what we talked about, I would like happily talk about them, but I think it's probably cool for David if you want to share what you're working on, the more specifics, because I feel like that could be informative to everybody here.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess born from the challenges that we faced as a user in developing a biodiversity credit, it was more than just developing the credit itself. I think that was somewhat straightforward. I think we could have done that, but the challenge then was who was going to buy it, um, and like the amount of work and effort and time resources required to buy it were or to develop the credit to then be able to sell it were kind of prohibitive at times. And so then that's, I guess, to your point, Austin, the power of the pre-finance to help stimulate the kind of development of the asset per se. But then beyond that, we started to look at how can we stack biodiversity and carbon, because we felt, okay, if we're doing everything for biodiversity, then we're missing out on the carbon. If we're doing on carbon, we're missing out on biodiversity. If we try to do both, then it's a very expensive project. So we came up with a concept of first separating them and creating a kind of asset value, a token on just the standing forest, the fact that the forest is protected and that there's this commitment to protect it. And then separate from that, an annual verification token that represents the bundle, let's say, of stacked biodiversity and carbon credits that come off of that forest. And this is interesting because that verification token, in a sense, could include and I guess being designed as an NFT per se, I guess technologically, or a smart contract, it could be more versatile and it could include way more than just biodiversity and carbon. I think that's where it becomes interesting because I envision it as a use case for Regen's technology to bundle any attestation that you have, or I guess no, the attestation comes from the other side, and bundle any work that you're doing, whether that's carbon, biodiversity, water, community, however you can capture that in a metric per se to put it into a credit or into a token. That would be the annual verification side of it.
Mhm. So in a way, we have this sort of model that we've been discussing at Regen that's called PAM, which stands for like planning, activity, and monitoring. And it's, in a way, it can be understood as like an iterative loop of like regenerative impact, like governing and planning it, designing the impact, actually doing it. Sorry, letting Dave in. And then monitoring it, like getting like, what is the outcome of that? And in a way, and like through one of those, in that version of a sort of crediting program, a PAM cycle reflects an issuance effectively. And you're doing it in a slightly different model, which is interesting and we're discussing. That's like, in this scenario, there's a sort of like standing forest, a sort of like basically kind of like an avoided deforestation. Like this wasn't cut down. This is here. And then there's and then one on top of that, is it adding like it's still here, it's like reinforcing the claim, or is it saying that a keystone species is present, or we can make claims around organic carbon, soil organic carbon, or something like that? That ongoing one, can you say a little bit more about like what are its parameters of regeneration say?
So I would say that the first layer being the standing forest, that's kind of historical protection, because the forest itself has to have a certain level of integrity to be eligible. And in the white paper we wrote, we described the eligibility criteria. We want it to be based off of primary forest, but we're giving it a little bit more space, so we're not explicitly saying primary forest, but it's essentially, think of what would tropical primary forest look like. That's the starting eligibility criteria for the standing forest token. On top of that, the question is, okay, what services does that standing forest provide us? And that can be carbon, biodiversity, those services bundled into an annual verification token that can then be traded in the same way as kind of all the other eco credits could be traded. So the annual verification token layer, that annualized layer, is that crediting layer. It encompasses the credits. I envision it to also be able to encompass other things. especially when we come into the question of, well, what other services does a forest provide us? And there's one that's interesting, that's access to forest is something that's important in what I consider, what I understand as traditional British style conservation. It's very exclusionary to people, which has been problematic with in terms of indigenous communities being excluded from forests that they have historically practiced their activities in. And so then how do you include people into this forest while also ensuring that it stays protected and that the integrity of that forest stays healthy and that biodiversity stays there? And so there could be other elements to this annualized token that encompass other things such as access, such as water. You know, these are kind of the benefits that the forest provides captured into an eco credit.
I have a question about the social aspect. You know, you're talking about the access to forests, the social aspect of, you know, just how people feel when they're able to go to the forest. How do you measure that? How do you add that and bundle it into the eco credit?
I think it would be, that's a question that can vary so much context to context. I use that as an example just because in our case, we have an eco lodge and we invite people to visit the forest, and so kind of I can visualize it clearly based off of my scenario, but I think it will vary wildly by different regions, different types of forest, different levels of like physical accessibility to the forest. But I can only speak for kind of how I would use it if I was a user, and it would be that, say we have it could either be benefits in terms of you have free access to forest, or you have like there's forest, there's ecotourism revenue, but then there's also ecotourism kind of like tokens per se. You can use this as a like 1 day night stay in the eco lodge, something like that. I don't know. I just mean to say that we can play around with the utility of that token based off of the specific context of that forest and the project behind it.
Right. And maybe, I mean, it doesn't even have to be measured. I mean, what's the value of having people practice their culture and traditions? Like that should be something that is a no-brainer, and maybe doesn't have to have a unit or a measure, but it's just like something that just adds to the co-benefits and makes the eco credit more robust and just can increase its value and significance. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where you can, you know, use utility or use kind of added value. You can use either of them in the concept. It's not, I don't think it's meant to be too set in stone. I think it should be designed to be more versatile. So yeah.
Go for it, Eve.
Yeah, thank you for that point. I want to kind of zoom in on that. So this session is helping a lot because I think my personal hesitation has always been like around the market component of it, that whenever I get close to that, it feels too messy and complicated and like triggering, and then I back away from it. So something that Becca said was doing this in a way that doesn't force us into an outcome unit package. And that's kind of also what you were just speaking to, Shayla. So I think the missing link for me still here is like, we still need funding though, right? Like the economics still has to be a part of it. So just servicing that for like your thoughts.
Well, I guess part of the prompt from before is there is, I don't believe, any like people don't read books because they want to consume sentences. They read books because they want to understand the ideas and the concepts that like inspire the writing. And in a similar way, if projects lead with the units, this is Shala's little Bay Aiden. If we lead the engagement with purchasers, initially, like the unit of impact like is there, but if I'm trying to sell somebody my book by saying, look, you're going to read all these sentences, I feel like it's a kind of similar mistake that's been happening in this sort of asset industry where people lead with the bounded discrete form that ultimately might be required in order for resources to flow in certain directions, but it's not the basis of the idea. The idea is a certain kind of impact biocultural like interaction, and the means or the medium through which resources flow can be a crediting system. It could be any number of kinds of crediting systems, or it could be grants, philanthropic, impact capital, SDG related things. So perhaps the potential here is like there isn't a good answer to your question. If we had a good answer to the question, anyone on the call had a good answer to your question about how to get the money to move, I mean, we'd be like hopefully where we are in like 20 years from now, or like 5 years from now, or 1 year. Like hopefully we will create the market or create the value logic that allows resources to move. But I don't think people necessarily have the answer to it. But I'm I'm pretty certain that unblocking people from being able to tell their stories around impact in a way that isn't so burdensome that they have to make a credit, but to begin to like establish what is the basis of value there, I don't know, underpins any kind of way that people will come and bring actual capital there. So maybe one of the takeaways I'm having from this session is that it's not like it's more than credits or beyond credits, is that there are different ways you can define the units of value, or maybe you just make no units of value and it's just a gift because a person believes. And so there isn't any metric tonnage per credit units. And there's no division symbol with a thing above and below it in a way. But most of the time there probably will be in some form because that's how value is based on a per blank basis. So this is in theory trying to stoke, maybe one way to think about it is like we're trying to stoke the waves of people to be able to durably attest to the impact that's happening without it being so prohibitively burdensome or challenging to do that they don't do it. And part of my question to David was for like, how do y'all do storytelling? Like because I think it points back to storytelling over and over again. And this is like a way of not having to have it answered before you start the journey. And how can that be not a waste of people's times? Because people aren't doing it in the classic additionality sense. Well, there's this perverse incentive with the additionality. It's like people are in theory doing this because they understand that the world sustains them and we sustain the world, and there's this reciprocity loop around. You have to like, it's basically self-care on a planetary scale. Why we give a shit about ecosystem restoration and biocultural restoration. But yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that because I lost my train of thought, but I think y'all know where I was trying to go.
I think and when you were talking, you kind of answered it too in the last part of what you were saying, which is that it's kind of shifting from like packaging a product or a credit and then delivering it at the end to, as you were talking about that, there's like a couple individuals who I don't know personally, but I have heard about in Red Hook who have a lot of wealth. So like if they're involved in that process and they have, and then that's also making more local, just the whole process of funding. Like there's have access to resources already within the community. And if people are involved in the whole creation, in the whole story, then it's more vested anyway.
So maybe there's a version of that that's like trying to, it's like the value is like we assume that you should just go to market with your goods like a fungible good, like a credit, and it's just a fungible thing. Someone who has the money can claim the offset, whether it's on carbon or something else. And this is like probing into the space, and I think some of the comments around like Ephraim's comments around like this transition moment is that we're transitioning into a moment of like semi-fungibility. It's like it's not just that you have a good and then you're going to take it to be sold. The the good or the living value is contextual when it's situated somewhere, and so is probably the person who's going to be like paying for it or like supporting it with value. They're probably also going to be contextual too. Yeah.
Sweet, thank you.
I would say the question of whether or not it should be outcomes based, I think that's tricky because
Mhm.
if it's not, and if there's no outcome, then why are you doing it? But I think then the question is, how are you measuring that outcome? And if it's quantitatively, that might be where we get into some issues. But if it's qualitatively, then you can start to capture non-traditional metrics
Mhm.
of success. And I think that's what we're aiming for here. And you don't want it to be limited just to, metric tons and but more also like community impact. And that's usually not something you can measure with numbers. And generally money runs away from things that you can't measure with numbers. So if we can, like, back to storytelling, tell the story of impact, which impact in itself is usually an outcome, right? If we can tell the story of impact through qualitative metrics, non-numbers, that's the storytelling arc that we have to figure out. Then we can bring in funding that's less traditional and usually more limited. And maybe then it has to be something that involves the funders, makes them part of the story. That way they'll understand, because otherwise, like with qualitative things, hard to understand unless you're also kind of engaging with the story yourself, I think.
It's a good sign when people start turning on their cameras because they want to say something.
Yes, thank you. Sorry I came in late. I'm
No worries. Welcome.
from Uganda, and so the conversation I've caught so far is around this friction of like if we're saying markets and how they are treating the relationships. And I was wondering whether reframing, which I think also relates to storytelling, can contribute. I know of an indigenous scholar called Tyson U. Kaputa. You probably know of him. And in one podcast, he was talking of this shift from offsets to resets. Okay, offsets to resets, and I try to take that further with the work I'm doing here in Uganda, to now think of resetting relationships between human relationships, between human nature relationships, that also because the climate crisis is not just about carbon. It's about the broken relationships between human and nature, between communities and their ecosystems, and between our economic system and the living world. And so what we want to experiment is around Ubuntu resets. Ubuntu is our bioculture philosophy that values interdependence. interdependence of and richness, multidimensional richness of all life, while contributing to, while recognizing the unique contribution of each individual being, human or non-human, to the whole ecosystem. And so, yeah, I was just curious about how you would think about that, the reframing from, and how it also relates to the outcome question you're talking about. It is still an outcome. You can have an outcome of just carbon, so much tons of carbon, but you could also have an outcome of a rebuilt relationship between humans and waste, for example. Yeah, where now people start to see waste as not not as waste, but as wealth, you know. And yeah, so that's what you're playing with.
I think that's really poetic. I'm going to have to flag that. I'm going to invite the others back into this call, but I want anyone who wants to reply to that. I would also love to reply, but I'm going to invite others in. But thank you, Abdul. That was really, really eloquent.
There's a big question from that of how do you measure relationship to nature?
Yes. Yes. There is. That's of
Proof
course
of
that's a big
reciprocity.
question.
Proof of interdependence.
Like you were saying, David, there are things you can't always measure. Yeah, but there is what in circles I've been exploring with. There is what they call the correlation coefficient, where you can measure the health of a relationship between two entities. Yeah. I haven't done that. It's something I would want to explore. But yeah, I agree with you. It's something to explore further, measuring relationships.
Definitely.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Just kicked us out. Just kicked us right out.
Yeah, I mean, it's like y'all should just get a clue and come back to the main space. But while we were having this really, really compelling and provocative conversation that I really appreciated, maybe we can do just like a brief share back and then I'm gonna invite anyone. You don't have to do it on this call. You don't have to do it on a future call. But if Becca's example, this is what's happening within me right now. I worked at Regen for a number of years. I am incredibly passionate about the regeneration movement. I'm involved in some regeneration initiatives. Honestly, I'd like to be involved directly with more, but what this session has helped me do is just think in a kind of humble and active way around how these big, meaningful, like profound questions, like the one Abdul presenced in the later part of our session, which was just fantastic, really eloquent, and the team's response I thought was great, was really, really fertile. I'm just inviting you all to think about what projects are you personally currently engaged with that a technology where you have your own agency to anchor the story of what's happened, that can be held not by the authority of some other entity, but by yourself and a community of other people. Like how can we anchor in the more humble and active narrative driven ways environmental impact through this infrastructure, this kind of sovereign infrastructure that we're collectively gathering? So I'm internally reflecting on like, what is my Reoak, I can't remember the name of your neighborhood, Becca, but like my equivalent of that, because I have several and I'm trying to figure out how would that express itself through this system. And I invite you all to consider doing the same. And then I'm also just going to pass it to maybe someone from this breakout room 0, the non-breakout room, to give a little share back on anything that came up for them during our session. If not, I'm just going to ask Eve to do it.
Sure, I can do that. So we were reflecting on the link between this kind of new, more humble narrative storytelling way of conceptualizing value with traditional economics. And Abdul joined us towards the end of our session and shared about his work centering around Ubuntu and resetting human relationships, human nature relationships, and expanding from thinking about simply outcomes to outcomes, outputs to outcomes.
We also spoke about the notion of offsets and resets, like resetting relationships versus offsetting relationships, and the idea that should have its own session on like a term that Abdul brought up called like correlation coefficients, patterns by which we explore the health of relationality between actors or between entities. And we discussed like, well, how do you measure that? And there will always be this kind of tension around that. Yeah, really, really fantastic session. Thanks you all. How about you, Becca?
Ours was great. I mean, the frame came in with like a great provocation, one that we frequently sit with in different ways at Regen, around kind of like what's all the work for, like, you know, what on the other side, whether that be a, you know, a buyer or a funder, like what are they actually going to want or need, so that we're not, you know, kind of just spinning our wheels and creating a lot of content that actually might make their job harder to see through. So that that felt very real and alive for me as I'm thinking about like, you know, the software side of things, or thinking about individual projects that I'm seeing going to so much work to produce all of this great content. And so yeah, it was a good discussion, one that I feel like just leads to 5 others. Would any others like to add to that, or anything that I missed?
I mean, in the same discussion, we were also discussing how do we differentiate according to the level of rigor or the level of science behind the methodologies, and understanding that even the data posts and the project pages could be in a very different levels of stage of evolution towards like very rigorous, high quality standard credits, or it could be just an entrepreneur or an individual that wants to start with some process and even can make mistakes and get feedback. And so depending on where we want to show and how, when we have all this diversity of things, how do we compare, even for the buyers, how do we make clarity instead of complexity? But we were discussing a little bit how the new tools and the AI and all that can be very useful, and the importance of the transparency of the data and the availability of data, having all the claims backed up with the data and with the protocols where they come from. It's super important for anyone on the other side trying to digest and trying to analyze all these things.
Said. Well, we're at time, and I feel enormously grateful for everybody coming on this journey with us. Is to like expand, is to kind of walk into the unknown in a way of what, you know, what are other ways of thinking, and how can we hold the, you know, vast amount of ideas and impacts and like different types of data being collected, and the needs that people legitimately have in bringing about change. So, you know, I frequently feel in builder labs that, you know, there are just a million other conversations to be had, and this is certainly one of them. Yeah, Austin, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I don't think there's an answer. I think the process and the practice of showing up and doing it with community and exploring it together is the answer. It's the only thing I can think of. I mean, it's like it's an ongoing commitment to exploring that, and through that, that's the only way. So these are some of the most nourishing sessions I have in my monthly calendar, and I don't mean to structure these interactions by the calendar, but I find my cup being full. One of the things that really is coming alive to me is around the notion of narrative and overcoming the qualitative versus quantitative tropes of narrative, and say, well, can there be a version of quantitative storytelling? One version is like unpacking and dismantling the binary of quality and quantity, and how those are incommensurable with each other. Another one is talking about, what is your storytelling legible to? Because like metric tons of carbon is in a way a form of storytelling around ecosystem functions that is legible to a market or legible to an economic system. Talking about the data around the presence or the quantity and diversity of bird species as data is a way of telling a story about ecosystems that's legible to machines and digital logic. So we're telling stories over and over again, and we have the capacity to decide or try to design, as Giselle's prompt, so that it's like accessible on the other side. Like how is how how are we making our storytelling legible to different kinds of systems, people, economic, machines? And that might help us get past this like quantity quality thing. But thank you all for your time so much.
Yeah. If I know we're at the
Go
end of
for
it. Okay, thank you.
Go for it.
So that's actually a great point, because when Shayla earlier in the call was bringing up the like, how do we, like, what is the experience part? How do we measure the experience part? Like, for instance, the experience of going to the forest and the value of that was like one of the examples, and that is like one of the pieces where is it a market, or is it my own experience what the values is interacting with? Is the value part interacting with my experience with like, which in the world of how do people make decisions, what do people buy, that is very correlated to their experience. But when we're talking about global emissions and that kind of stuff, the loop of how do my actions impact my own experience, that loop oftentimes is not that closed if we're talking about global markets and global emissions and all that. And so that's where like the abstracted quantitative market thinking and incentive thinking, that's where we try to make sense of that unclosed loop, right? But the loop is a much more closed if it can have a correlation, a relationship with my personal experience. And so actually how we change that, or like what also came up when Abdul was sharing, is like the how do we measure if relationships were changed? I think if the like fundamental relationship of things is changed, that's the point where incentives are much like abstracted incentives are much less needed and work much less. And like if the underlying relationships are changed, and we could make an A/B test of like what abstracted incentives work and do they work, like if the underlying relationships were changed, then those incentives might not work, or might work differently. And so like all of this like market and credit and like abstracted things in my mind are like either to compensate things that are going like quote unquote wrong, right? Or change how things are going. And one of the outcomes of the credit market would be if credits are no longer needed, right? And so like the whole credit market, I think, could be viewed as an incentive. And if the underlying relationships are changed and people act differently, quote unquote, even though there's also a lot of issues with that framing, but fundamentally then really, yeah. So for rambling, but yeah, thoughts.
Oh, it's super rich. You cut out a little bit at the end. I unfortunately have to hop, but I thought this was really, really, really generative. I saw that Abdul and some others who share their contact information in the chat. Before you go, if you like, you're welcome to share your information in the chat to stay in touch and join the Luma invite for future ones of these. This is the kind of integrity and quality that that gets us out of bed in the morning, and so we just keep it going. And also, Shyla shared a link. If you have any suggestions for future sessions that you would like to talk about, we try to keep it not overly structured to give room for conversations like the one that just happened to occur, but we'd love suggestions. Yeah, and I was also keeping the conversation going on high-low as well. Thanks, you all.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone.